My name is Darren Hupke, and this is Pixels and Polygons, part of the Soundstone Network. Welcome to a new episode of Pixels and Polygons. I am Darren Hupke, the host of the show. If you are a returning listener, thank you so much for coming back and checking out another episode. Hopefully this is another entertaining one for you, and I appreciate you for coming back week after week. If you are new, it's a simple pitch. I sit down with a guest each week and I ask them a video game related prompt or question, and we talk about it. It's 20 to 40 minutes or so each episode. This can stem from topics like what's a underappreciated or below average game you love that doesn't get enough attention, or what is your history with video games? When did you start playing and when did you fall in love with them? Or why do you play the games that you play? There could be a lot of different things. The conversations can go in a lot of different directions, but the point is just to have a great and thoughtful conversation that maybe sparks your own ideas or your own interests as a listener to think about your own responses and hopefully just have some fun along the way. If you like what you hear and you want to support the show, I've got a few different ways you can do that. I have links in the show notes below to everything that I do, and I'll highlight one of those in particular. 32-Bit Library is a retro gaming book series for nostalgic gamers. Each volume is a curated retrospective of games from the original PlayStation library. Every game has a written entry discussing its development and what made it special, rather than a generic review. Multiple screenshots from each game highlight key moments and refresh readers on these classic titles, and every title features a giant double-page screenshot for added visual flair. Additional essays by industry professionals provide context and history within each volume. Whether you are a die-hard PlayStation fan or want to explore the history of this generation for the first time, the goal is that you'll learn something new inside every volume. You can find links in the show notes below, or head over to pixelsandpolygons.net to buy your own physical copies, or over to patreon.com/Darren Hupke for the digital editions. With that out of the way, we can start the episode right after an ad from one of our Soundstone Network partners.
Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. I'm Nick McConnell, and you caught me reading the instruction booklet for Street Fighter II in preparation for my weekly stream Instruction Derby, where I take a look at the creative, fun, and sometimes bizarre lost art of video game manuals. Did you know that, according to the manual for Street Fighter II on the Super Nintendo, Ryu was born in 1964, making him 62 years young, canonically? Happy birthday, Ryu. You're looking great. Did you also know that, per the manual for Laser Invasion on the Nintendo, the UN enters a conclave in order to select a new commando? Or did you know that the dancing enemies in Super Castlevania are named Paula Abgul and Fred Askare? These important facts and many more are discovered every Wednesday at noon Pacific on Instruction Derby, over at internet website twitch.tv/Nick McConnell, part of the Soundstone Network.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Pixels and Polygons, a conversational podcast about video games. I am Darren Hupke, and for another episode in 2026, I have a brand new guest. So this is cool to bring on some new folks. You may know this individual if you follow them on social media or have bought any of their gaming-related like books and projects and everything. But Mikolai from Forgotten Worlds, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm good, Darren. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it. So, this is Mikolai from Forgotten World, a magazine about old video game magazines, and I guess various other bits and pieces that take my interest. It's looking back at the impact, I guess, of old magazines on a generation of kids, and how that impacted us pre-internet and helped shape our worldview.
Yeah, that's definitely like the pre-internet thing of it all. Like that's where I got all my information from in North America, just reading, EGM, Game Pro, like, any magazine I can get my hands on. That was my chance to see screenshots and learn and hear about things. And like, oftentimes, even if I could never play a game, sometimes reading about it across a few different issues or of a few different magazines, like try and like experience as much of the game as I could. But I'm assuming that magazines kind of felt and filled that same void for you growing up.
Same. Look, I had a Commodore 64 back in the day. Like this would be probably like late 80s, around 89, 90. And my mum was actually a librarian. And so she'd bring back some magazines from the library. I think the first one I saw was Compute or Compute Gazette, which covered things like the IBM compatibles, Amigas, Commodore 64s. And look, to your point, I had Commodore 64, but they were covering all kinds of formats. So I would see these, amazing images of Amiga games and IBM games. And I'd be like, oh, damn, I'd love to play that. But, the humble Commodore 64 didn't have the capacity to play those games, or they looked very different on my system back in the day. So I do remember, flicking through those magazines, you'd see the ad, you'd see the screenshots, and you'd be very envious of people who had those other systems and had those games. Yeah,
it's interesting hearing like how that was the desire, that was the impact, that's what was in your collection. Obviously, again, me being from North America, it essentially was, we got the Nintendo Entertainment System in the late 80s, and like that was it. There wasn't as much of that interest in like the home computer space or like the Commodore or the Spectrum or Amiga or anything like that at all. But I just recorded episodes with Audie Sorley. He lives in Europe, and he has the same thing growing up in like the Commodore and like the Amiga and all these things. And so like there's other parts of the entire world, who were exposed to and were shaped, like their video game tastes were shaped by entirely different platforms and systems and everything. And it's just interesting how, now with the age of the internet and everything, we're all playing the same things.
Totally. Even in terms of consoles, right? We had the Sega Master System was like the bigger console here. So like even back in the late 80s, just because they had better distribution and like a better company running all that, we had far more likely to see a Sega Master System here than you would like an NES. Or even like I remember like the old Atari 7800s would have distribution out here. So apart from like, computers and stuff like that, even like the console scene, obviously we were aware of the NES, but we had, like Segas, there was like Ataris, those computers. And so it probably was similar to what you have in the UK to some extent, rather than what you guys had in the US.
Yeah, that's crazy. But thank you for joining the show and everything. We both do some of similar work and everything. I don't know how it was I discovered you. If maybe you want to take us through some of the history of you doing like Forgotten Worlds and everything, but I don't remember when I discovered you completely, but it must have been like some kind of Twitter posting like long ago, or a few years ago. And then eventually, like when I started getting like the confidence and the desire to like, try and start to create myself, I reached out to you and sent you a couple articles that you ended up putting up on your website as well too, which like was a big deal to me. I was like, oh man, look at this. I have things like posted somewhere. Like, does this mean I'm somebody? And then I realized like I didn't need anybody else's approval to be, quote unquote anybody. And then I started kind of doing things on my own. But what was the origins? What made you decide to lean into, starting the website and then even like creating printed editions of your work?
Yeah. So I guess like the origin story is almost like a COVID fever dream. So, we're all like locked up at home. I'm from Melbourne, Australia. And we had like 256 days, I think, of lockdown over the course of 2 years. So it was like rolling lockdowns. We were at home, we were working from home. And that was all, a very horrible time. But at the same time, we did have more time in the day, right? Because you're not going to work, you're not commuting. So you do have that extra time. So it's a case of, well, what can I do to what can I do to be productive during that time? And look, I'd always loved magazines. I've been publishing magazines, indie, zines and whatnot since back in the day. I've not done a magazine for maybe 10, 15 years, and suddenly had all this time on my hands. And I was like, what's something that, I'm passionate about? What's something that I know more about than most people? And so at some point during all that, I was like, well, I love old magazines. And I feel that, old magazines are seen as disposable, right? Like we'd buy them, you'd read them cover to cover, but ultimately you'd throw them out the door, right? After a month or so, most people throw them out. So, I mean, I kept all my magazines. I still have all those magazines from back in like the late 80s, early 90s. And I'm like, well, I love these magazines. I know a whole lot about them. I still have them. Maybe it's worth having another look at these magazines and the impact they had on us as kids. And that was the original concept. So I started writing about that, just had like a little blog on Medium, started doing some stuff like that. And I was like, well, maybe I can do a physical magazine. I'll do a little test run. I'll see how it goes. And obviously I want to, before you can sell magazines, you need to build an audience to actually know what you're doing. So, I jumped on Twitter back then, a few other platforms, started posting some stuff, ran like an initial copy, issue 0 of Forgotten Worlds magazine, a magazine about old video game magazines. That got picked up, that sold out. So I was like, okay, well, there is an audience out there for this kind of stuff. There's a generation of people who grew up with these magazines who remember EGM and GamePro and Mean Machines, and maybe haven't thought about them for a long time, or haven't thought about them from the I guess as adults. And so I thought it'd be interesting to go back and not even look at these magazines, but also I guess contact some of the original writers and editors. That's what I started doing, going back and talking to some of these people to get their take on these magazines, and I guess crafting a bigger narrative around magazines, the impact they had. So it kind of grew from there. So it's now, been 4 years, maybe a bit longer, getting ready to issue 7 and 8, and still looking for different angles on these magazines and the systems. And I guess what I really love too is not so much even the games themselves, but more about the culture around all this stuff. And that's what really, I guess, is interesting, is it's not specifically about one game or one system. It's about the broader culture around video games and how it's kind of impacted us all. So, yeah, Here we are.
Yeah, that's fun. Yeah, the issue 0 is the only one I don't have. I didn't get that. I wasn't on the bandwagon that early on, unfortunately, but I've been buying them all, issue 1 all the way on through.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll keep buying them. They're great. They're I mean, I am like a lifelong gaming fan and everything, but also like when I'm not able to play games, when it's commuting to work, when to maybe like still think about or talk about it, having podcasts to do that, or if I'm away from systems or on breaks or traveling or something like that, having a book or something to read, it's nice to have something else to kind of keep me in that mind and headspace and around the thing that I enjoy. So I really like what you do. Well, let's
and also congrats on all your work. I really do appreciate all your efforts as well, and all your amazing magazines and books and whatnot. So it's mutual.
Thank you. Yeah. I feel like we're just brothers from just different hemispheres at this point, doing the things that we have been doing. We've been chatting a lot over the years. So that's fun. But let's talk more about magazines. But first, let's do an icebreaker question. We'll kick things off like we normally do here on the show, and then we'll circle back and we'll keep more talking about magazines and overall what they mean to us and maybe some of our favorites and see where that goes. But I'd love to know from you, what is a game that you wrongly judged by its cover or title? Can you think of it? Yeah. Can you think of anything that maybe you looked at it, you thought it wasn't be for you, and then one day you gave it a shot and you loved it, or you thought the name sounded silly and you kind of just passed it by and then maybe circle back?
I remember I passed on the Mega Man game for the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive, the Wily Wars, whatever it's called. Back in the day, I saw it in like a going for cheap. A video store was closing down. They had their copy of the game, I want to say for like $20, whatever it was. And, having grown up as a Sega kid, I was not really huge into Mega Man at that point in time. I was like, maybe not. But ultimately, I let it go. It turns out that game is worth, several $100s these days. Mm-hmm. So to this day, I'm still kicking myself that I saw it for like $20 a pop, didn't pick it up, let it go, and only rediscovered it much later on like the Nintendo, online Switch service. Mm-hmm. I went back and went, all right, this is pretty cool. But it'd be nice to have had the physical copy of that game because, it does go for quite a lot these days.
What do you think was it that made you skip it? Was it the name, like the Wily Wars? Was it like the look of it? Like, what do you think the younger version of you was thinking when they passed that by?
I don't know, because I mean, in retrospect, I look at the cover and look at it, I'm like, this is all, it speaks to me these days as something that I would definitely, be interested in. But yeah, so I'm not sure why I passed. And that's what annoys me. It's the fact that, I was like, damn. But to flip the coin, in terms of a game that I picked up randomly off the back of the cover, ended up loving, just to turn the question around, is a game called Whiny Whiny World for the Mega Drive. So there was like an import video game shop near my place way back in the day. And, in those days, the box art and the cover kind of did the heavy lifting for games, right? Because you might not know what it was about, but if it had a cool box art, you might be inclined to pick it up or buy it. And it's like this single screen puzzle platform game by Kaneko, I think it is, where you're like these two little green dinosaurs or green pink dinosaurs, and you have to smash blocks and, kill enemies and whatnot. So I was randomly in the shop, saw this, bought it for whatever reason, loved it to this day, recommend it. Whiny Whiny World on Mega Drive. If you haven't played it, check it out. It's a great game.
I have not. I'm trying to Google it as you're talking. I don't remember seeing this before, but
so it's kind of like in the vein of like the Rainbow Islands type style games, the single screen platformers, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I think it's released as the Berlin Wall, which is a really random name for the Game Gear as well.
That's funny. I wonder if this is your it seems very Commodore 64 coded. The single screen, action, all that stuff. So I wonder if that's where it's tracing some roots there for you.
Essentially, yeah.
But fun. Cool. Well, thanks for answering that then. But yeah, we already kind of started talking about it. We're kind of sandwiching the episode, but let's talk more about magazines. I mean, that's what we wanted to chat about anyway. So like where do you want to start? I guess, we can talk about maybe some of our favorites, some of the things that maybe inspired us, some of the things that we like that are happening now in that space. But where would you like to start then?
Let's start with import copies of EGM magazine.
Yeah, I'll talk about EGM. Stuff. Yeah, I'll talk about EGM all day.
So, obviously EGM was huge, and it was probably the premier magazine back in the day. But obviously, growing up in Australia, it was weird because you guys had obviously American magazines. In the UK, they had a bunch of UK magazines. But being based in Australia, we kind of had like a mishmash of both. So we'd have stuff on import from the US, we had stuff on import from the UK. And so maybe that also shaped my view of magazines, because it wasn't from one region. It was like this kind of weird mishmash of what was happening in the UK versus what was happening in the US. And so EGM, well, for starters, like most magazines would arrive here like 3 months late, because the quickest, I guess, well, not the quickest, but the cheapest way to ship a magazine to Australia was via like a steamboat, essentially. And so they'd put these magazines on the back of a boat, and it would take 3 months for them to arrive here in Australia. So we'd get all our info 3 months late. But sometimes in news agencies, you also get the air freight copies. These ones were like express shipped, and it had like the big sticker on the front. And it cost something like ridiculous, like $17 back in the day, which adjusted for inflation is probably going to like $40-50 these days. But yeah, so EGM and having these air freight copies was, I guess, almost having like a preview of the future. And so if you had a copy of like EGM air freighted in the school playground, you were the most popular kid in the playground that day, because everyone wanted to see what's happening in the US. It's like a little preview of the future. And so it's really interesting to kind of get that I guess, dichotomy between what's happening in the UK, what was happening in the US, and the different approaches to those magazines and publication. But EGM was definitely, obviously, a big influence. And I especially love EGM. My favorite era is the early 90s, when it's still published by Sendai Publishing, and it's still a bit, a bit more underground, I think, and a bit more kind of, before it became, I guess, those were my favorite issues. So EGM back in the day, that kind of really resonated, and that kind of set the tone for everything that would come later on.
Yeah, those EGM issues, like any issue, that I'd get my hands on. But I wouldn't always have a subscription, or eventually I would finally start to subscribe to it. But but the first magazine I could subscribe to and afford to, it was EGM by far was like the number one choice. And if I could add on to that and, have something else come to me monthly, I was doing that. But it was always like with me and my friend group, like EGM was always like the number one, like best one to kind of get and read and buy and everything. And I don't know why we liked that one. I mean, I loved like the review format, obviously like the Famitsu inspired, like, for capsule reviews, like kind of briefly talking about it, but being able to see like the scores and 4 different opinions just made it seem like more professional or more like, oh, this is serious. Like this is for real. These people are like rating and reviewing these and arguing and debating about them, so that must mean this is a really good game or not.
And yeah, looking back, I really do appreciate that 4 reviews for it, right? Where like, I think I've spoken to like Dan, Sue, and some of the other guys from back in the day. And they said that, yeah, it's counterintuitive, but it makes sense to have these kind of 4 scores on the page. Mm-hmm. So at a glance, you can kind of see, okay, well, this is what they think of it broadly. And like you said, obviously people having different views on that game rather than just like the single person review here. Mm-hmm. But I mean, also, I think video games and computer entertainment was the other one I bought from the US. And that was cool because it's so different to EGM. So that was kind of more adult and almost nerdy in the way that they kind of approach video games and computer games.
Yeah, and they also
and I guess what was really
PC as well, yeah, which was not something EGM always kind of avoided.
And I guess what was really interesting there was because they had the column by Arnie Katz, he used to like review other people's like zines and whatnot. And I think that's how I came across it. Like the idea of like publishing your own magazine was reading about the fact that there was like digital press and all these other kind of indie publications that were literally just photocopied, magazines and whatnot from the US. And I was like, well, I mean, my mum works at a library. She's got access to a photocopier. And so that's kind of what inspired me to start producing magazines back in the day. My first magazine was called Neotech, which was like a magazine, a Mega Drive zine, which is literally just, me printing up stuff, maybe even on a typewriter, cutting into strips of text, buying some old of anime magazines, dicing that stuff up, literally using scissors and glue to stick it down on a page, get my mum to take it to the library photocopier, stapler, put it together, like proper old school style. And then I had like a little video store nearby. And for whatever reason, I was like, hey, can you guys sell my, dumb magazine at the counter? And they're like, yeah, sure, whatever. So, yeah, I had like my magazine, being sold at like the local like Blockbuster, like $1 a pop, whatever it was. And this was been back in the early 90s. And that's kind of how, I guess, the broader, publication thing started back then. But it was actually Arnie Katz and that column in VG and CE that inspired all that. So, yeah.
Wow, I did not know that about that. I didn't read that magazine that much. I've like gone back and looked at it, retroactively now and everything, but I didn't realize they had done that. The thing that I can think of, there was a magazine here in North America, Tips and Tricks, which was essentially like 80% like a cheat, like, reprinting cheat codes and Game Shark codes and things like that. But they did have these little like, columns on like the bottom quarter of the screen. They'd have like just like a running ticker of like just different things each month of different info and everything. And occasionally they'd put down like they talk about people's like homemade like zines or fan made projects and stuff like that and talk about it. And I always thought that was neat to know people were out there, doing these things like on their own independently and whatnot. And I mean, in reality, like, getting behind the scenes and attempting to make these all on my own now, like it is difficult, but at the same time, it is just like, one technology hurdle is really, that's it. And once you overcome that intimidation, it kind of, anybody can kind of do it.
Exactly. I think what's been really cool about this too is just discovering that there are other people around the world like yourself and a bunch of other folks who are all doing variations of this, right? It might be digital, it might be physical. But there are people who are, passionate about whatever it might be to do with video games or whatnot. And, they're putting out these magazines, they're creating these communities. I think it's really cool. I think it's really inspiring. And just to segue quickly into a plug, the next issue 7-8, a double pack. Issue 8 is the kind of indie magazine and zine annual. So I've collated everyone's kind of work from around the world and put that together into one little pocket magazine as a little snapshot in time, just to kind of showcase what everyone's out there doing. So yeah,
cool.
Include yourself.
yeah. That's we did exchange info on that. That's true. So yeah, looking forward to that. When we were talking about EGM, actually, had you seen on YouTube? It was like a collaboration from My Life in Gaming and GameSack. They're like two different YouTube channels.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, that was super awesome to see. And I mean, it did spoil some things for me. It revealed the identity of Sushi X. So now I know that they're
Ken someone, I can't remember.
Ken Williams. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, I was just reading the it's published now by Read Only Memory, the publisher, but it was originally an online. But Matt Leon's oral history of Street Fighter 2, but he's one of the folks that is in that as well, chatting every now and then and talking about like the development and the history of Street Fighter 2. So just knowing, the fighting game lover that he was, and from the pages of EGM always talking about fighting games, the Sushi X, like younger me had no idea who this person was, but turns out,
and how much he hated Game Boy back in the day.
Yeah, just hated Game Boy.
I was going to say that video is amazing, and everyone, if you haven't watched it, should definitely watch it. But two things that struck me was Ed's dedication to photos. That was a really cool part.
Yes, yeah, that's probably why EGM was like the one people would like to get the most, because you could see the screenshots, you can make out more of those details. Because I mean, I have seen like a lot of old magazines, like sometimes the screenshots could be dark and the inks could kind of bleed, and it would be kind of like gross, or it would not even have like appropriate screenshots. It was just like stock art that like the developers sent them, and they just like wrote up something about the game that you wouldn't be able to see. But yeah, EGM and like the attention to detail they put into being able to capture, like with that photo box and like all the stuff that he kind of did to do that. That was such a neat part of it, and seeing that in that documentary, that's cool.
That was really cool. So yeah, I love the fact that Ed went to such lengths to get those great photos. Because like to your point, back in the day, some magazines had amazing photos, some magazines had awful photos. Like they were blurry, they were did not do the games any justice. So yeah.
Yeah. So then, so EGM was number one. What else? What would you say like a non like North American one? What was some of the European magazines that you would read, or anything else worldwide?
Yeah, so the classics were, I guess, like CVG, so computer and video games. They had like covered like multi-format stuff, and they had like Julian Rignall was one of the writers there. He looked after the Mean Machines column in the back of that magazine, which was kind of looking at imports like PC Engine and Neo Geo and stuff like that. He went on to then found to do Mean Machines magazine, which is a classic, I guess, European magazine, which ran for about 2 years. And so I guess Julian's a really seminal figure in magazine publishing, and he's still, I guess, around to this day. But again, it's just interesting to get that different tone of voice from the UK versus the US. And I guess I've spoken to some of these people, over the years to kind of get their take on it. And what they say is the US and the UK had very different distribution models, right, for magazines. Obviously, the UK is much smaller, it's more densely populated, so it's easier to get magazines out, whereas the US is, vast with, a huge population. And so in the UK, publishers could basically do smaller print runs. It cost them less to get the magazines out there. And so they weren't as reliant on advertising to basically break even. Whereas in the US, the model's a bit different. There was more of a subscription-based model in terms of the way magazines were distributed. There was more reliance on advertising, and that tended to, I guess, also impact some of the language and tone of voice. So it's a bit more professional, perhaps, because there were more commercial interests there. Whereas in the UK, you could print magazines; it cost you less, and so you didn't have to rely on advertising to subsidize all that. So I think that the UK mags were a bit more irreverent and a bit more honest and a bit more brutal in how they spoke about games as well. And that kind of also, I guess, influenced me and maybe influenced, I guess, a bunch of other people. That something as boring as, distribution of a magazine and advertising impacted the tone of voice, which impacted what the magazine's character was like and how they spoke about games. So if you look back at some of those old reviews in places like in magazines like Mean Machines, like they're brutal. I think the lowest score I ever saw was like a 9% score for Road Fighter on the NES, if I remember correctly. But yeah, so that's also just a little interesting, quirk of history in terms of how these magazines evolved. And like I said, being from Australia, you'd see both sides of that coin, which is interesting.
Yeah, I feel like the tone of magazine, like over the years, like obviously for like Nintendo Power, for example, like they were never going to be in a position to like be too critical on a game, and it was more of like almost like a catalog feel of like, hey, like these are descriptors, we're passing this information forward to you from the publisher, but here are some upcoming games or some strategies and tips and our thoughts on these games. But really it was more of just about presenting the game without a critical lens to it. And then but I didn't really quite realize like the advertising aspect of it all. But like, yes, like some of my favorite issues of EGM would be like the November and December issues, because it felt like they were like massive. It's like, oh my gosh, I got 300 pages here, but 120 pages were advertisements, because that's what they would have to do in order to like justify their costs and everything. And obviously you don't want to anger or upset, publishers with, dunking on their games because then they may not send you like review copies, or they may not allow you to cover their products. And then so what do you do? So you do run into a risk of bias there, of course. But
and the ads are really interesting too. I spoke to, I think, Chris Bennick, I think his surname is, from VG and CE from recently, about game ads. And I remember people sometimes back in the day would like bitch and complain about the number of ads in EGM. I mean, I think they're great, but whatever. But he said that ads were also really important, because if you're a kid at a newsagent, right, you got your $5 to buy one magazine, and one magazine's 300 pages long, and one magazine's 100 pages long, you're going to get the one that's 300 pages because that represents better value for money in your eyes. Now, half of those pages might be ads, but it doesn't matter, because if it's twice as thick or as the other magazine, then you're going to buy that one. So I think ads were also really interesting from that perspective, because they help bulk out the magazines. And like I said, if you're buying one magazine, you're going to buy the biggest one you can find, essentially.
Yeah.
So that was also interesting.
No, I would do that. I mean, and I didn't mind a nice ad anyway, because it would often have like, even if they were doctored or enhanced or anything, it would still have screenshots from the game potentially, or more information about it. And so just giving me more information as a kid to decide what it is I wanted to kind of play or be excited by and everything. So,
exactly.
Yeah, it was important, I think, still. But I like the idea of not necessarily having the weight of that bias potentially, and being able to kind of be more critical with your voice, in like Mean Machines and in those types of magazines there. So,
and not even critical, but just like mean, like,
yeah,
because EGM was critical, right? Like EGM and those magazines would give low reviews, but like Mean Machines would actually be actively mean, and like comically so. So I think that was fun.
Yeah, and that's another aspect of magazines, and I wrote one of those articles for you on that. It was like on the personality of magazines, like that was part of it, like the tone at which people wrote, like that evolved and everything, like that comic book and that exaggerated personality, the over the top, the over hyperbolic like statements and everything, like that was an era. And I think EGM, once it shifted from once it became like a Ziff Davis magazine, and once like Shu and everybody, like that next kind of like that next era of the magazine kind of took over, I felt like started to kind of have more of like a mature and refined like way that they were presenting gaming magazines. It wasn't just for like kids, or just wasn't for like the exaggerated, but it was kind of like more professional, or I mean, I don't really know how else to describe it, but it just kind of changed the tone at which that point a lot of other magazines kind of followed, for sure.
And I mean that too, and I'm going to get super nerdy here too, but one thing I love about those magazines from the early 90s is actually the layout, and the fact it's quite simple because of the limitations of like desktop publishing. So back in those days, especially in the early 90s, magazines were literally put in place where people would cut out text, would cut out images, would put them on a piece of paper, would scan that, whatever it might be. But it's like a very laborious, long process. But which made it like kind of very blocky magazines because everything was templated. And so just to go on a little tangent here, I think when desktop publishing changed, when the internet came along, and suddenly you could do more things with your designs of magazines, people were like, oh, I can do this. I can have these insane background colors. Now, whether that was a good idea or not is, debatable. But you'll notice, I think that around the mid-90s, when desktop publishing changed, when the internet first started to come along, that the actual way that magazines were laid out and the way they looked became a lot busier rather than the kind of more straightforward, simple designs of the early 90s, because people could suddenly do all these other things they couldn't previously do as far as layout goes. Now, whether they should have done those is debatable, and some of those magazines are really hard to read these days. But yeah, I just think that's really interesting too, that those technical aspects and limitations had a real big impact on what we actually saw and how those magazines looked.
Yeah, I mean, I can, like, going back and doing research and looking up games for some of the books and stuff I do, like, when you get to those eras where it is just so noisy and muddy, like even like through like scans, like you can tell like those printed inks of like using like the game's cover art as a large backdrop and having the text like shape around the character, and like some of the decisions were like, maybe they thought creatively they were being interesting, but like the actual legibility of it was sometimes in questions with some of the extremes there. And then, as the decade came to an end, and you had obviously again things like EGM, but like magazines like Next Generation, and I think a lot of those like Future or like Imagine Media, like those the same publishers. I think they really started to have more of like that clean, like bring it back, to more like legibility and more like simple and clean lines and all that stuff, which I do appreciate. And I think that style still like holds up to this day and everything. But yeah, what are some of the design influences then on you? Like when you're putting together yours, like currently, I mean, I guess even for maybe some of the older projects you've done, but what do you prefer? What is that design sense that's like kind of inspired you, or like, how do you like to present the things that you're putting together?
So I think essentially I look at old magazines, right? And they're already really busy. So when you look at those old magazines, so, my magazine, Forgotten Worlds, tends to have, scans of older, magazines, screenshots, reviews, covers, ads, whatever it might be. And they're super busy. So I guess my approach is always, two-phase. One, those mags are already super busy. So anything I do around the periphery of that is just going to distract from the magazine. So I try to keep it really clean, simple, white backgrounds. So to kind of showcase the actual work itself. And the other thing is simply just, budget and design aspects. These magazines, there's not a whole lot of budget to go around. I outsource the basic layout. And so it's just easier, quicker, and cheaper to try and keep, the focus on the original artwork, to use a lot of white space, and so like that, do the heavy lifting. Rather than trying to, develop a whole extra, layout persona, alongside this already busy layout stuff. So yeah,
that's fun. Yeah,
so less is more.
Yeah, that's I think I agree. I hope my stuff isn't busy. But like the 32-bit library books I do, those essentially started as being inspired by like magazines, not necessarily books. And so like there's, a ton of screenshots. I have like captions that, to me are just, straight out of the magazine. And usually with every game, I'll give a double page spread of one giant screenshot that is just full bleed, for both pages, like maximum. And I stole that from Retro Gamer, like reading those over, the last 20 years, however long it's been. It's been a while. Yeah. I just love it when you flip to a page and you just suddenly see like a giant screenshot and like all the pixels of it all, like just like hyper zoomed in on it, and just this macro view like on across the pages. Like, I just love that. So like being able to do that as well. Like, I just love the way it looks. Like that just lets the game, or lets the image like speak for itself even too. Cause it's nostalgia. It's memories. It's like all the feelings you had for these things. Like, I don't need to tell you that story or say that or share that. Like, I can oftentimes just let the games do that for themselves. So, that's kind of like something I've always like lifted from magazines myself, which, I think I'll continue to do.
What I love too about like, independent publishing and zines is that everyone's got their own approach, right? And that's the cool thing, that everyone's doing, broadly similar areas, but everyone's approaching it from their own perspective, their own way. And so every magazine is going to be different from the next one, which is really cool. I really appreciate that. Yeah. Just to see what everyone's up to and how they're interpreting this stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, we could probably wrap this one up here soon. So let me ask you maybe one more question. What are some things in the magazine space that you're excited about today? Like, what keeps you motivated to keep doing your thing? Or is it the lack of like major magazines out there that is influencing you to keep doing what you're doing. But is there anything happening in the modern like zine and magazine space that inspires you today?
Yeah, look, I'm inspired by a bunch of people that grew up reading these magazines, now doing their own magazine. Whether it's online, whether it's physical, just discovering there's a community of people out there who all have broadly similar interests, and who are passionate enough about that to produce something. And the fact that every single thing that is produced is different to next. So the new, the zine annual issue 8, like I said, I think brings together about 30 different projects from people around the world, and just showcases what they're working on. This is just a little shameless plug while I'm at it. But the cool thing is that, like I said, that everyone has a different approach, a different perspective. And it's really exciting to see that come to life. Because I used to love going to news agents, right? You go to news agents and you have like rows and rows of magazines. Those days are long gone. The internet, I guess that's the other thing too, is obviously the way that algorithms work and whatnot. There's lots of great websites out there, but it's not the same. I love the tangible aspect of having a magazine you can open physically, look at in your hands, and just being able to, take some stuff I know about, magazines and bring it to life. And I guess the other thing is that these magazines allow me to answer questions I already have myself. So, for example, I'm now working on issue 9. But I'm just going to give us a little preview here, which is all about the TurboGrafx artwork. And I guess that came about because I was like, why do these covers look the way they do? Now, obviously, people love to talk shit about TurboGrafx, game covers and box art from back in the day. But I was like, well, there has to be a reason behind it, right? There's a reason it looks like this. There's a reason that it and I think in hindsight, it kind of has I've kind of grown to like it. But the idea was, well, what is happening here? And trying to answer that question has become the basis of, the future issue. I think that each issue is similar, right? I've got a question about something or other to do with, games or magazines. And, I want to answer that question, and hopefully some other people are interested in that same question, and I can obviously contribute to that in some way, shape or form. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, I'm looking forward to the issue. Where can people buy it? Where can they give you their monies if they want to do that?
You can go to forgottenworlds.net, and that will link you through to the Shopify account where you can buy the magazines and also check out the articles and whatnot else. Yeah, forgottenworlds.net, or otherwise just all the usual social media haunts as well. So
yeah, I'll put those in the show notes below so people can click on those. Your last issue, wait, was it the last issue? The Sega or the...
Yes.
Yeah. And then you had those inset cards with a little collaboration as well, which I thought was cool. With what, Devil's Blush, wasn't that? Is that pronounced?
Yeah. He's also actually lives about half an hour down the road from me. So there's actually a few people out in Australia doing similar stuff, which is cool as well. So
yeah, that's wild. Small world for you there. But so a lot of great folks out there doing that. Looking forward to the new issue to check out some of that, to maybe see about how we can buy more and be involved more with what's going on currently in the modern day space of these self-published and independent sources for gaming fans and whatnot. But thanks for joining for the episode. Yeah, like I said, I'll have all the links below. And go ahead.
I'm a big fan of your work, so I really do appreciate being able to come on and talk about magazines and whatnot with you. So yeah, it's been great.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I'll have links and everything below in the show notes, so you can find the websites and everything there. But we'll also be talking to you again soon. You'll be on a future episode that, spoiler alert, we're going to record right after this one. But in a few weeks, listeners, you'll hear it. So more from Forgotten Worlds. But appreciate you. Great talking with you, and look forward to speaking with you again.
Thanks, Darren. Much appreciated.
Listen to Flashback 64, the chronological Nintendo 64 podcast. Hosts Gooey, McKenna, and friends flashback to the 90s and early 2000s with a look at the Nintendo 64's catalog and its contemporary cultural and historical context. Starting with the console's launch titles and proceeding in release order, we discuss classics like GoldenEye, Super Mario 64, and Star Fox 64, as well as some not-so-beloved games, lesser-known titles, and everything in between. Along with game-specific deep dives, we also cover other bits of pop culture from the time, like films, music, and more. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.